So, I think we are ready to start. I would like to welcome everybody here in Bayreuth and also Nicholas in Columbia, South Carolina, and of course Wolf-Dieter Ernst, who's going to be our speaker today. Before I'm going to introduce you, I would like to make another announcement talking about our lecture series. Our last date here, this will be February 1st, our panel discussion, which will be on the festival idea and the 21st century idea of intercultural issues, especially looking at Wagner. Unfortunately, Aino Laberenz is not going to be able to come, so she's not going to be here. The same with Stefan Mösch. But Francis Queret, the architect of the Operndorf in Africa, he's going to be here with us. And also Dr. Ulf Vierke, who is the head of the Ivaleva House, the African Cultural Institute of the University in Bayreuth, is also participating in the panel discussion, as also Arne Stolberg, who's going to come from Bern University. And also I will be on the podium, and we might be still looking for somebody else to join us there. But now, it's a great pleasure to announce Wolf-Dieter Ernst, who again is a colleague from Bayreuth University, and it's also a great pleasure to work with him since almost 2 years now, because he came to be a member of the faculty here in April 2010. And he actually was involved as a student in a program at the University of Gießen, which is called in German Angewandte Theaterwissenschaft, applied theater studies, so to speak, more also with the practical aspect of it. And that makes completely sense also looking at his vita, because he is also he was also involved as an actor himself, as a performer, being especially engaged with installation, with performing, and also as a director, of course. He did his PhD in Gießen. No, that's not true. At the University of Basel actually, his master degree he did in Gießen. And this was on a topic where he actually explored in the next couple of years until today, and this will be also his talk today about, this was on performance der Schnittstelle Theater unter Medienbedingungen, on the relationship between theater and media. Performances, and that was published in 2003 in Vienna. Then he moved to the University of Munich, where he did his Habilitation, his second PhD, so to speak, on the training of actors from the late 19th century, 1870s, into the 20th century until 1930. And part one of this project will be published as a book very soon. And that is already announced in the web. Der affektive Schauspieler, and part two will be published, I don't know when.
Yeah, in due time.
Okay, very good. Today he will be talking about distributed aesthetics, touching his areas of research, which is actually also the theory of performance and the theory of theater, but of course also looking at a special aspect which is important for Bayreuth, the Siemens Festspielnacht, where the Bayreuth Festival is also available for more than the people just in the Festspielhaus. So we are very much looking forward to your presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Arno. Thank you, Thomas, for the invitation and also for setting up this wonderful lecture series. And thanks to the technicians also for putting it on or podcasting it. Indeed, I would like to make a preliminary remark. I took advantage from the podcast in a way that I prepared my talk based on the discussions we already had in this room, and which I could trace in the existing footage on the web. And I will take up a remark by Sven Friedrich, who said in the discussion to Ms. Gebbers, that the Parzival by Schlingensief was kind of a discourse closure. And I thought, yes, in a way it is, but in a way it is not. As Ms. Gebbers has shown, Schlingensief created something like a network out of it. So closure, again, is in a dialectical relation to distributed aesthetics, something I will present to you today. And I see this lecture series actually as an established network, an established discourse, and I'm very happy to be part of this. So, dear colleagues, dear students, dear Nicholas in Columbia, Wagner and Distributed Aesthetics. I will probably miss the point for musicologists. I will not so much talk about Wagner's music, I have to admit. What I can talk about as a theater scholar, and especially one being trained in performance analysis, is the effects Wagner's music and Wagner's festival will probably have on what we call an audience. And I will address this question of an audience presuming that we are in a mediatized culture. So that is kind of the basic idea I have. So don't be disappointed if I take in a position somewhere out at the Volksfestplatz and not at the festival house to enter this network. It is a truth almost universally acknowledged that a theater director mounting an opera will at some point be tempted to think in marketing terms, whether in terms of money to be spent or in possible loans and future income to calculate with. Unlike the idea of a poor theater, in the sense of Peter Brook, music theater productions seems to imply thinking in terms of different dimensions, bigger budgets, higher salaries for singers, composers and musicians, and more and richer audiences being attracted. Now, investments in opera certainly take on another dimension if one aims to run a standing house, as is the case in Bayreuth. In this case, the idea to limit its repertory to only one composer and his work appears particularly challenging. Dedicated to Richard Wagner's oeuvre only, the Bayreuther Richard Wagner Festival precisely meets this challenge every season. In this respect, the Bayreuth Festspielhaus, besides all its standalone features and its outstanding role it takes in with the history of the opera, might as well be considered as a dramatic example to demonstrate the dialectics of aesthetics and economic considerations in the performing arts in general. In my paper, I would like to suggest that it might be fruitful to look at this relation of marketing, aesthetic appearance, and audiences from the angle of network theory. In my first part of today's talk, I will introduce an approach by Geert Loving and Anna Munster, who, in reference to recent internet-based communities and the ongoing shifts in the creative industries, if there are any, purposed to understand the aesthetic and economic process less in fixed terms of form and content, but as a constant formation. In what follows, in part 2, I will try to apply this way of thinking in terms of formation to the Bayreuther Festspiele, more particular to the public viewing event called the Siemens Festspielnacht. I will explore how the Green Hill, as the acronym for the Richard Wagner Festspiele also reads, in its attempt to attract new audiences, slowly undergoes a process of formation. In looking at the Smart Mob, by the title of Opernhausbesetzung, and the English translation would be Opera House Squad, at the National Opera House in Munich in 2011, I will discuss then some future tendencies in all its pros and cons. The key question of my talk today simply is, what happens to the Wagner Festspiele when we define its audience less in fixed terms of their presence in the festival theater, here and now, but when we define the audience rather in terms of their agency within different networks. So I come to my first part on distributed aesthetics. This concept, distributed aesthetics, developed out of an initiative of the Dutch media activist Geert Loving and the Australian media theorist Anne Munster. Predominantly, distributed aesthetics is designed to critically investigate what has become known as the post-Fordistic economy, characterized by online communities in the Web 2.0 or 2.0. Don't know how to pronounce this. Now, as I understand our perception of the Wagner Festspiele as equally inflicted with, if not shaped by a mediatized culture, it is worth looking at Munster and Loving's idea in some more detail. What is meant by post-Fordistic industries and networking? The core idea is that of a feedback loop between product and production. Unlike traditional industries defined by their material products, new economies rather provide immaterial values such as service and information. In fact, some, if not all, products offered in the new economy contain a strong service aspect. In the case of a mobile phone, for example, the service contract offered by the provider certainly is of higher value than the concrete object, which in fact could be replaced easily in case of its damage or loss. Alongside with this trend towards immaterial goods, we see that within the new economy, flat hierarchies and feedback loops linking clients and companies, providing and even creating information to a degree which supersedes the former model of centralized information flow. In the game industries, for example, the design process of online games seems to depend to an ever-increasing extent on the aesthetic process of playing a game. Parallel to the traditional phases of production, which is the experiment, the test phase, and then the product launch, designers and users in the game industry alike constantly redesign a game through shared ludic experience. Hence, a game can take on the appearance of a collective composition. It resembles the idea of what Umberto Eco has defined as the open work of art. An open work of art provides a strong set of rules, but it radically leaves open what will happen to the participants. In this respect, both the open work of art and the game only come into being when people participate in it. From this logic of the new economy, Munster and Loving draw the conclusion that new media are increasingly distributed media, and they require a rethink of aesthetics beyond the twin concept of medium, form and medium, unquote. Their idea is to describe what is actually happening within techno-social networks being an open process of formation. And I quote again, "Distributed aesthetics must deal simultaneously with the dispersed and the situated, with asynchronous production and multi-user access to artifacts, both material and immaterial on the one hand, and the highly individuated and dispensed allotment of information media on the other." Unquote. Before I will demonstrate how the concept of distributed aesthetics could possibly apply to the case of the Wagner Festspiele, it is necessary to take a closer look at some of the concept's implications, because it is important to understand how this approach potentially changes our perspective on the opera and its audience. Following Munster and Loving, distributed aesthetics demands thinking in terms of networking and agency. Now, this is a wide field to investigate in, but roughly speaking, one can distinguish three different meanings of the term network. The first would be networking as a management procedure. Here, networking signifies a soft skill. It suggests the strategic use of a network of personal contacts to meet certain objectives. In this understanding, an aesthetic project, as for example an opera performance, would be considered as a consumer good, which is pushed into the market by means of a clever use of a personal network. Yet what form the performance could possibly take on would not be influenced by the process of marketing or networking it. The second notion of a network would be the technical system. Networking refers to, for example, railway systems, power systems, and the communication system. Here, the verb networking describes the technical and material process of connecting a number of entities to coordinate the flow of information, data, electricity in a complex nonlinear structure. While it is true, as Gundula Kreuzer has depicted, that the aesthetic appearance of an opera highly depends on the use of latest technology, Munster and Lothing would maintain that this understanding of a network cannot fully grasp the process of constant formation. In fact, as the debate of liveness and reproduction technology has proven within my discipline, we cannot really maintain that there is a live event in the first place, which then would be transmitted and transformed by networks such as TV channels or camera systems only later. Rather, we have to admit that it is the constant remediation, in the sense of Bolter and Grusin, the remediation from the live stage to the screen and back again, which is at stake. The third notion would be that of the philosophical concept. On a philosophical level, networking is a post-structuralist mode of thinking, influenced by the Deleuzian concept of the rhizome, aiming to analyze cultural processes. Under this accent, it bears a strong relation to the notion of performance, I'd say, inasmuch as both approaches share the critique of ontology, intention, and presence, and foster instead the idea of continuous citationality, repetition, and relationality. In this respect, we can enter the network of an opera performance in reading it as a cultural process, which would equally encompass the actual performance and perception as well as its technical and economical setting or framework. And at this point, I would like to specify my position because I take advantage from the third notion, the post-structuralist notion, and it demands that I position myself. In using it as a philosophical concept, I enter the network as a methodological way to trace something, to look at something in a specific way. What am I looking at? Since I'm here for 2 years now, I've seen 2 productions in the festival house. I got an email, which unfortunately I deleted, offering a ticket to the Bayreuth Festival House, including a stay at a Frankfurt hotel for 1,400 euros, which was a funny thing to do for a Bayreuth-based professor. I've been to the opening ceremony up there, taking some pictures, you will see that later, and I've been to the Siemens Festspielnacht. But I'm addressed as a theater professor in Bayreuth with Wagner in a very peculiar way. People ask me, what do you think about this performance? People ask me, are you a Wagnerian or not, basically. Some of this discussion went that way. And you see my talk will be taking advantage from this material because it's already there. It's not a special interest because it's there and I'm already in this process of getting networked, so to say. So this is my position. But let us look at the position of Munster and Lothing just for a bit. As the concept of distributed aesthetics clearly holds a political and sociological connotation, I would situate my interest rather on the third, which is the post-structuralist understanding of networking. And in the case of Geert Lothing, there's actually a strong biographical reference towards political activism, which cannot be overlooked when you read this text. During the heydays of the digital revolution in the 1990s, Lothing became known as a media activist who collaborated with artists in Sarajevo during the blockade of the city in the Balkan War. Loving, among others, set up mailing lists, making use of the early internet technology to ensure free press and information flow. In this sense, I would maintain that when you read this theory or this proposal, which is actually part of a discourse, there's a strong leftist Marxist notion to it, to look at what people actually do to ensure emancipation, to look for possible freedom against the technological control of networking. So this is their interest. As you see, the similarities between distributed aesthetics in the sense of Münster and Loving and Wagner's idea of the Bühnenweihe-Festspiele, however, might appear less evident. One has to admit that Wagner's idea of the Green Hill at a first glance seems to suggest just the opposite of networking and distributed aesthetics, inasmuch as Wagner intended to provide an aesthetic experience which would allow people to consider themselves as an almost regionally defined community in opposition to the broader society in the valleys around the hill. Well, in fact, Giorgio Agamben, in his book on profanations, has reminded us that the separation of a holy community from a profane society could be considered as the basic distinction which separates a religious sphere from the secular one. This tendency to separate art from common life is driven by spiritual desires and certainly accounts for many artist communities in the 19th century, and particularly so for Wagner's idea of the Bühnenweihe-Festspiele. Yet, as Susanne Lachenicht in her talk has already pointed out, one might think of Wagner's project in terms of the local and the global alike. And Nicolas Vasogni has already demonstrated that without an European, if not global, networking of Wagner communities, the holy atmosphere of the Green Hill would lose both people to believe in, as well as its economical resources to constantly produce and maintain this atmosphere. In this sense, the dialectic relation of the profane society and the religious community is all too evident. And in fact, as Agamben demonstrates, the act of separation is reversible. The holy might as well be contamined again, which is, it could be brought back into cultural circulation and provided for common use. Münster and Loving consider this dialectics of community and society as the political and social dimension of distributed aesthetics. As they conclude, the borders between community and the society have in fact become blurred. I quote, "We are now aware that networks are different kinds of formations that cannot be understood according to the old distinctions between society, Gesellschaft, and community, Gemeinschaft." Unquote. If this claim holds some truth, then the project of the Wagner Festspiele certainly has transformed and will transform into something different. The more the society participates in this experience via aesthetic distribution, and the more the Wagner communities themselves will change their exclusive shape. I'm not to judge or even predict to what benefits this process will lead us. However, when we consider the ticket price ranging around an average monthly salary on the black market, it is clear that a community shaped primarily by financial capital only would certainly possess a necessary tool to exclude others from this community. But the question then would be, is it also a sufficient tool to define a community? Well, it's necessary, but is it also sufficient to define what this community is in terms of sense-making process? I come to my first example, which is the Siemens Festspielnacht. Or are there any questions by you students so far on the methodology? Okay, now then let's look at the pictures. This leads me to my second part, where we'll look at the Siemens Festspielnacht. With approximately 1,900 spectators in the festival theater compared to around 20,000 people at Bayreuth's Volksfestplatz, the public viewing event not only multiplied the number of participants, it also revealed a totally different use of an opera performance. The most striking impression was that of an informal atmosphere. People did not have to buy a ticket, they just appear in their casual shirts. They brought their blankets and cushions, as well as some food and beverages for the following 6 hours. And in some cases, they even brought camping equipment. Spectators from all ages felt attracted, and for some this event took on the form of a family trip where kids could play around, while their parents hung out in armchairs. Talking and standing and leaving was allowed, though people only rarely make use of it. And some video footage may be helpful to document the atmosphere and how people perceived it.
The sound, specially adapted for the Festspielplatz, with a total of 86 staggered active loudspeakers and an overall output of 273,000 watts, was a musical delight. Thanks to a 180 square meter LED wall and 8 cameras installed inside the festival theatre, the open-air viewers could experience the big emotions and dramatic moments of the opera performance really close up.
Okay. In 2011, this event took place for the 4th time. The basic idea of public viewing is to transmit a live event which takes place simultaneously in a festival theatre to a wider public, both to the local audience in Bayreuth and in collaboration with the Arte channel to a wider TV audience. With the Siemens company, one of the global players in the branches of industry, energy and healthcare, and an important sponsoring partner in the arts, supported this event. The TV channel Arte, in return, provided a prime time slot to address culturally interested spectators. The technical and financial effectiveness of this performance was indeed impressive. As the trailer, which you have just seen on the Siemens homepage, comments, the aim was to stimulate, if not to supersede, the live performance in all its emotional quality. And I quote from the voiceover here, which you just heard, thanks to a 180 square meter LED wall and 8 cameras installed in the festival theatre, the open-air viewers could experience big emotions and dramatic moments really close up. Unquote. Now, what appears to be a common marketing strategy to promote the brand of Wagner Festspiele and to successfully assure contractual exploitation rights on the performance takes on another meaning when we look at the audience's agency. I would maintain that their level of activity cannot be limited to that of a passive onlooker or consumer, as marketing models would suggest. One reason to assume that audiences are much more active than expected is to be found in the dispositive of public viewing itself. So let us take a closer look where this format, public viewing, comes from and how it works. In a historical perspective, the term as well as the idea of public viewing became popular in Germany, particularly during the 2006 Soccer World Cup, where thousands of supporters gathered in front of huge screens which were set up in stadiums or marketplaces to celebrate the sport event. Public viewing since...
The icing...
This is a mishap, sorry. That should be the one. Public viewing since then produces the effect that anonymous masses share and celebrate their emotional attitudes towards whatever is depicted. This may be the emotion of joy and grief, depending on the outcome of the game. It may be the love for a certain style of music or the music theater alike. Though some critics comment that the masses gathering in public viewing areas rather make a spectacle out of themselves, regardless of to the event's content, the emotional atmosphere of public viewing is generally acknowledged as one of a special kind, and this atmosphere adds a great deal to the positive image and acceptance of this format. The shift towards collective perception of broadcasted event is not innovative. On the contrary, in the early years of TV, it was quite common to share this experience in public. Just one example at this point to remind us where this comes from. A case in point is the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953, which was reported to have attracted the masses. People gathered in front of radio receivers mainly and the by then rare television monitors, leaving the streets empty. And as it was raining, this is a very nice picture that they stand outside and watch the coronation. The audiences were well aware of the event as taking place live, and they willingly contributed to the event in as much as they managed to assemble in special TV halls or in front of shop windows collectively. The masses behaved as if they were to see a live event. The close relation of TV with a private living room came in only later. At this point, I would like to consider the theoretical implications of a public viewing event. It is easy to define three characteristics here in the sense of Münster and Loving's concept of distributed aesthetics. Firstly, public viewing events are formations. Inasmuch as the spectators gather in loosely defined public areas, they cannot be defined in its form. Rather, they build occasional formations with blurred boundaries. It simply does not make sense. It simply does not make a difference whether one enters or leaves during the event. And this is a picture I've chosen for that reason. It's kind of the side angle when you approach from the side to the main screen. So there was actually the mounting of the monitors signified something like an auditorium where you had idle sound and you had seatings there provided by the Siemens Festspielnacht, but also the square is very wide and you could sit somewhere else and watch this from a side angle, and this picture is taken from there. Secondly, the player's performance is perceived as dispersed. The player can only loosely determine what shape the audience takes on. Whereas a live audience and the players are necessarily connected in a feedback loop and collectively influence to a certain degree what is happening on the field or on the stage, the public viewing audiences can only remotely do so and is dependent on channels of distributions. And thirdly, this public viewing transforms our conventions of perception of what is considered as live. In public viewing, there is no ideal spectator. In public viewing, there's simply no ideal spectator as a director would take in when he mounts an opera, the precise position of the ideal spectator. There is no ideal spectator, I would say. Rather, we have a whole array of perspectives to look at this event, and accordingly, people can make very different use of it. One can even go so far as to claim that public viewing has an effect on the live event. It is very telling, for example, that in the case of the Soccer World Cup, TV channels were keen to integrate comments from the so-called fan miles into their program, as if the whole dimension of the event, Soccer World Cup, would not be covered appropriately without this feedback. And players in return tend more and more to react on fan communities in performing certain gestures after scoring or simply in producing greeting routines via the camera for those at home. But then, one might ask at this point, what is the actual event about? If all possible distributions equally add to its eventness, its character, where does it take place? Or are place and time merely some out of many elements which in some give the event its meaning and atmosphere, its event character? Now, these questions certainly cut through any ontological definition of what an event is or is not. Yet beyond the debate on the ontology of performance, the idea of distributed aesthetics sheds light on the fact that a major shift from form towards formation has somewhat bypassed the normative definition of an event or a theatrical event taking place in the here and now. So spectators are still aware of what a live event should look like. But in public viewing, they are keen to adapt their perception to constitute an event which is perceived as live in its own way. I would like to draw a methodological conclusion concerning the concept of network and agency at this point. The first observation refers to the question, where do we access a network? The answer would be that in a networking perspective, it makes sense to consider the performance in the festival theater as well as the Siemens Festspielnacht and the TV broadcast to be on the same level. They are equal access points to a network, in our case, the Richard Wagner Festspiele. In this perspective, the live event, against all logic of cash flow, against also the coding as an authentic high cultural event, and against any purifying aesthetics or aestheticism, is of no more or less value than the public viewing or the private consumption of a TV program by the same name. They are merely free out of numerous possible ways to make use of an opera performance. The second thought concerns the notion of the subject. From what I presented, it is clear that this mode of thinking in terms of networks demands a decentralized notion of subject and author. I'm not doing any justice to Neuenfels and the conductor and all the people who sign for this event. Yeah? And I'm aware of this. Agency within a network does not mean that a subject gains control. Agency is not an intentional act. Rather, it signifies how entities of a network control each other and are affected by each other. My last remark is on the nature of the relation which constitute a network. So the relation of the Festspielhaus theater and the Volksplatz with the public viewing event. Thinking in terms of networking does not mean that all possible entities of a Wagner network, whether they are human or non-human, dead or alive, can be thought of as randomly connected to each other. Relation is not to be mistaken for relativity. This is why networking theory traces how agency circulates within the net and which relation the actants prefer. In our case, I'm mainly tracing the relations the participants in the public viewing area maintain with the festival house, because I mainly consider agency as an aesthetic decision by both the audience to pay attention to an opera performance as well as by the Wagner Festspiele to attract the audience's attention to their program. So there's kind of two movements which maintain this relation. And this cuts across any communicational model which has a clear sender and a receiver, and that would be something like located aesthetics. Yeah? That's the traditional way to look at the Festspielhaus theater. This brings me to my last observation of the Siemens Festspielnacht, in which I will take a closer look at the final moment of this event. I will argue that the transformation from form towards formation became particularly evident when at the end of the Siemens Festspielnacht the singers, the opera singers, visited the public viewing area. We have a short video clip of this moment. We see how the singers appeared on site and positioned themselves in front of the LED screen wearing casual blue polo shirts. The impression is that of a relaxed atmosphere. A glass of champagne in one hand, they waved hellos to the audience with the others, and all were smiling. And this is what we have already started here.
The icing on the cake, after the show, the fans could celebrate their screen stars on site.
The scene leaves ample room for interpretation as it indicates a form in crisis. When we compare this appearance of the singers, for example, to the way they would normally take their bows in the festival theater, the situation is somewhat reversed. Usually, a performer in taking bows would slowly lose his tension as he or she would step out of the role character. He would never present himself to the audience in casual look and without costumes. He would not allow the audience to watch him sipping at a glass of champagne. Another difference worth noting is that of the significance of this applause. It is said that with the applause, a theater audience gives an immediate feedback on the performance. Applause signifies that the imaginary contract between the audience and the live performer is valid or was valid, and that the spectators believe in some way in what they saw. Given the artist's delayed appearance on the Volksfestplatz some 40 minutes after the last curtain, it is arguable, however, whether the audience actually gives a direct feedback and whether they would believe in anything at all. Rather, they express their gratitude for the spontaneous visit of the artist, similar to an attitude one would find appropriate for a Meet the Artist event on Backstage. So it remains ambivalent how we can read this scene. One reading would be that the opera singer's supplementary bodily presence is a belated attempt to transform the Siemens Festspielnacht into an authentic live event. That would be the significance of the Siemens Festspielnacht as opposed to the TV transmission. Now, when you're at the Festspielnacht, you get the bodily presence. It would be an act of giving the event an original signature. What is the object being signed here? And is it the site in Bayreuth, close to the theater, the locus of signature? Rather not. If public viewing was site-specific, it would automatically raise the question whether the perception of the opera in public viewing areas somewhere else would be of a different kind. The example of the Soccer World Cup has proven that this is not the case, because audiences were enthusiastically following the games no matter where. So it would appear that the opera singers located the event, being virtual in the first place, through their appearance on site. As such, through their act of signification, they give form to something which rather is in a constant formation, which has never been there before, so to say. In another reading, this scene holds for the unique open-air atmosphere. Especially the bad weather conditions, a tremendous thunderstorm in the second act, might be of interest if we are to understand how this scene somehow juxtaposed the usual roles of performers and audience. In this line of thought, one can maintain that the audience only partly expressed their gratitude to the performer. The performers, in return, expressed their sympathy for the audience, that patiently, if not stubbornly, remained listening without having any appropriate shelter. Thus, the performers not only acknowledged the audience's commitment to the show, they also accepted that people made a different and unexpected use of an open-air opera event. They just did not leave, though many reasons suggested to do precisely that. I come to my second example, which is the Occupy Opera, or the Opera House Squad in Munich. Now, this unexpected and reversed audience feedback on the opera automatically leads me to my third part, which is the Opera House Squad project at the National Opera in Munich. Here, the different use of a given cultural format was taken to another extreme. In 2011, the National Opera in Munich saw a smart mob gathering in the opera's premises. A local group of activists by the name of the Urbanauten was invited to organize this event, which took place during the opening ceremony of the Opera Festival at 28th of June 2011. They were called to actions via SMS and social sites. The announcement reads as follows. I have to skip this. Okay, here we are. Opera. Who owns the opera? Opera House Squad. The Urbanauten swarming happening situated in the in-between of the public sphere, somewhere at the border of the digital and real space. On the occasion of the opening of the Münchner Opernfestspiele 2011 on June 28th, 2011, starting from 6:48 p.m. through to 8:37 p.m. The Urbanauten, in collaboration with the Bayerische Staatsoper, invite you to the urban happening and the occupation of the Opera House. And public opera ball of the enthusiastic kind, an aesthetic trespass into the National Theatre's house, a real mise en scène within the distant virtual world, a democratic pub crawl of the digital kind, a brilliant opening of the Münchner Opernfestspiele, opera for all of us, opera of a different kind, unquote. Now the translation is mine. If there are any mistakes, they're also mine. People who have followed this invitation had to sign up by mail and got instructions where to assemble and how to behave. A first flash mob was reported to take place at the Wittelsbacher Brunnen at Lehnbachplatz, where members of the brass section of the opera orchestra accompanied participants in their waltz. The password for this event was Damenwahl. Then the command appeared on your smartphone, take the opera house by storm, to be followed by the command Queen, where people were asked to wave their hands to the public outside in the way members of the royal family would greet their subjects. And I think we have some footage here of this waltzing event. This is a very condensed documentary or trailer of this event. So, I'm sorry, I can't stop it the way I would like to. Yes, I can. So what you actually see is this typing indicates that there's a backup team steering this event. And what you hear is not the music they were playing on site. There's a soundtrack throughout the whole trailer, which is very disturbing. And there's also some YouTube footage by people participating. But here the sound is so bad that I decided to take this one here. Okay, and here you see the brass section. It's obvious that the music is different. Now, inside the building, people occupied the empty stage. This symbolical occupation, together with the action of mounting the occupant's flag on the opera roof, eventually was considered to be the climax of this event. Now the participants not only trespassed the house, they also entered the main stage, as if they were opera performers. In fact, this reversal of roles was intended. As the opera's online editor, Johannes Lachermeier, indicated in his blurb, the collaboration with the Urbanauten aims to transform the democratic idea of opera for all of us into the more emancipatory approach of opera by all of us. And I quote Johannes Lachermeier, "We bring Beethoven and co. to the public places and streets where they are usually not to be found. The city becomes a stage, the opera becomes an urban meeting point again. Opera for all of us? We have this all year long, but on June 28th, the slogan will be opera by all of us," unquote. It is said that people danced to an electronic mixed dance hall version of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. It is not the one from Saturday Night Fever. I checked this on this YouTube footage, but really a remixed version. They danced on stage, thus expressing their idea of opera by all of us. And again, with the wrong music, we have some footage here showing the dance. So, first they were called to action waving hands. This is the usual steering routine in smart mobs. The next scene you see is an appearance of an opera singer. That was Angela Brauer, and she performed Non più mesta from Rossini's Cinderella in the box across the main stage.
Non più mesta canto al fuoco, staro sopra gorgheggiar, no.
And in the reports on this event, people were asked to boo her down. They did not do this. And then comes Disco Mob. Let's just see there. And there's the dance. There's the DJ. Okay, and then we see the mounting of the flag, but we can skip this. So it's said that people danced to an electronically mixed dancehall version of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony on stage, very shortly only, thus expressing the idea of opera by all of us. One can of course be critical about this smart mob and its impact on the opera performance. What might appear as a cheerful revolutionary action turns out to be a win-win situation on a closer look. The interest of the National Opera House to address younger urban audiences clearly meet the Urbanauten's discourse on urban development, on gentrification and other critical issues. Both parties, regardless of the shape the smart mob would take on, certainly gained publicity for their specific agenda through this event. Smart mobs are just cool and still have an impact factor. And of course, as any smart mob, this event is far from being contingent. In fact, with the doors of the opera wide open, it reveals a careful mise en scène. Yet I think Opera House Squad gives us some more insights to understand the shift towards formation taking place. First of all, there was hardly any aesthetic form. One must admit that this smart mob did not react to an opera performance in particular as similar to the public viewing event. It is doubtful whether this mob would consider the aesthetic form of music theater as their target at all. Rather, this intervention aimed at the opera as the cultural institution, among others. So what I'm saying is, might as well be the Deutsche Bahn main station in Munich. Let's just enter that next. Yeah. Secondly, again, the aspect of community building is crucial to fully understand what was going on here. The smart mob was a time-based community of around 350 people called to action by the use of portable media. Compared to the public viewing audience, the smart mob had much more of a spontaneous and informally built entity, a mob, than any traditional audience. You did not have to prepare yourself in terms of purchasing tickets, getting dressed appropriately, and finding a place in the subterranean car park. You just had to be informed and on site when the mob started. A smart mob thus demarcates what is excluded from the opera as an architectural and a social space. An opera house is no place to gather or to hang around. On the contrary, visiting the opera demands much more control of one's social behavior caused by the institution's elite character. Thirdly, the event's informal character radically questioned whether opera by all of us is the future of opera performance at all, and of the Wagner Festspiele in particular. It is very telling that the party on stage did not strive to take on any form similar to an opera performance, it not even implied singing, if we leave aside the performance of the Rossini aria. So literally, opera by all of us would take on an appearance we would hardly recognize as opera, according to aesthetic standards in form and contrast. If the aesthetic frame of the black box opens up to the informal street scene, we have only formations, but no form. A democratic noise will replace the aesthetic sign in this case. Ultimately, being a spectator means visiting an informal party, an anti-Wagnerian form of reception in a state of distraction, as Walter Benjamin has termed this in his art in the age of mechanical reproduction. Opera, for all of us, marked the opening of the biannual opera festival. Though it was a success in its experimental character, it can be said to have only little impact on the following festival's program. Yet the event could be looked at as a kind of a blueprint to understand how the audience's agency has changed. Undoubtedly, contemporary audiences organize their life in real space and in online communities alike. Also, audiences are much more willing to participate and engage in action than to remain passive in the darkness of an auditorium. And last but not least, audiences can activate different patterns of perception they have learned in their consumption of other media. These three tendencies, the lifestyle of being online, the increase in value of aesthetic action, the activation of different patterns of perception, lead to an idea of the audience classical aesthetics cannot fully grasp. Now, looking at the somewhat misplaced crowd pouring into the Baroque interior of the National Opera House, one gets the impression that the absence of evening dresses and glasses of champagne actually caused more irritation than the absence of the staged action with music this house is designed for. Does this shift in action indicate that within opera the audience's performance is of equal, if not more importance than the music theater? The frequent complaints about the opera's mise en scène indeed seems to propose that there are obviously other reasons, other strong reasons to attend the opera than the interest in aesthetic form. I come to my conclusion. I think I have 10 more minutes. Yeah. In this paper, I have pursued the idea to look at the public viewing event and the smart mobs as signifiers of what Munster and Loving coined as distributed aesthetics. I have argued that public viewing of a Wagner opera takes on the appearance of liveness in its own way. In this way, the formation of an audience in front of a screen is only loosely related to the performance in the festival theater. On the one hand, people eventually want to see and hear an opera, but at the same time, they enjoy their situation as being independent from the opera patterns of behavior. Their modes of activity can best be described as a cheerful mixture of patterns they drew from their experience of opera, beach, and party alike. Wagner Light. In my second example, I was looking at the Opera House Squad as an example which demonstrates a gap dividing the opera as a social institution from the notion of the opera as an aesthetic form. In this smart mob, we can talk about form only to a little extent. Rather, we see a constant formation as the core idea. This event seems to pose the question how an audience could use the opera's premises as their own public space. What appears to be a somewhat postmodern mediatized opera ball at a first glance thus shades light on the way the social, economical, and aesthetic aspects of opera relate to each other and struggle against each other. Whereas normal business tends to fill the gap between the aesthetic, economic, and social, the smart mob demonstrates its existence. In my critical reading, I have maintained that Opera House Squad poses the question what price one has to pay when asking for the audience's active participation. In this case, the high level of audience participation, which allows getting into a party mood, leads to the absence of anything similar to an opera performance. As this invention suggests, it is either the audience on stage or the opera singers. I'm coming back now to my leading question: what happens to the Wagner Festspiele when we define its audience less in fixed terms of their presence in the festival theater here and now, but rather in terms of their agency within different networks? I would claim that due to marketing and changing modes of perception, the Wagner Festspiele, as well as the audience, are already within a process of constant formation. In reading through some of the reviews on the latest production of Tannhäuser here in Bayreuth, it struck me that nearly all critics, to a different degree, have not noticed this change in perception due to networking. Rather, they maintain to think in terms of products and strong authorship. In doing so, they fixed the role of both producers and audience in a way not appropriate, I would say, to the actual experience a visit on the Green Hill allows for. Let me finally quote just one example from an anonymous critic by the acronym RML, who posted his review of Tannhäuser on the day after the premiere, on the 20th of August, on the portal I Hear Voices. I will then comment on this text from the perspective of networking theory to round up my argument. So here's RML. Jim Davis Garfield once said, if you want to look thinner, hang around people fatter than you. Now I understand Katharina Wagner's smirk while being booed after yesterday's performance of her production of Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg. This evening, deafed by the thunderous boo fest reserved to Sebastian Baumgartens for his production of Wagner's Tannhäuser, I could not help thinking that you can go far worse than Miss Wagner. At least, she had a couple of insights about her libretto on stage. Well, she did not stage it very well, but she tried. Baumgarten believes he has an insight too. Let's read it. And he quotes, I don't know where, probably in a program book. The question we are faced with on a daily basis is, how are we to reconcile our pre-subjective drives and impulses, the asocial, with our subjective plans and dreams in social and communicational context? And time after time, the answer is quite simply, we can't. That is because this antithesis lies at the very heart of life. Only in art, and especially in music, is this antithesis abolished. Is it only me or this, or is this, yeah, that's interesting because I copy and pasted it. Is it only me or is this the most obvious observation one could make about Tannhäuser's libretto? But there's also set designer Joop van Lieshout's take on the story. And he quotes him, the battle of Tannhäuser is about choosing between the Apollinian and the Dionysian. At the end, Tannhäuser is not able to find either of them, unquote. I would say that this is a typical review for what I would call located aesthetics as opposed to distributed aesthetics, in as much as the text gives the impression that its subject is a product, the performance, and that this product is produced by a director, Baumgarten, maybe Joop van Lieshout. The critic himself, though he is obviously distancing himself from this product and saying that Baumgarten's mise en scène was a bloody mess, takes in a position outside the aesthetic process. He namely also quotes the audience's reaction, a thunderous boo fest, as if he was not part of it. This critic takes in a position somewhere outside, secured and demarcated by an already well-established setting. You get a good idea of this setting when you look at the media preparation for covering the opening ceremony on the red carpet each year at the beginning of the festival. Additionally, the long passage quoting Baumgarten's and van Lieshout's potential intention promotes the idea that opera theater could be perceived primarily as a way of sense-making. The rest of the review then tries to prove that this sense of the musical and dramatic score does not come across. So there's, in the opening chapter, or the opening Absatz, English. Paragraph, thanks. In the opening paragraph, he sets the intention, and the rest is the proof that this intention doesn't come across. My observation would probably be the same if my primary occupation were in decoding an aesthetic text in a semiotic operation. But this is not the case. Having seen the performance, being up there, having seen this scene I've just depicted here in the photograph, having seen all this, I found myself losing my interest in the story and its aesthetic signifiers in due time. And in this moment, I realized that I've entered a very specific network I would call the Wagner network, which equally encompasses the audience's behavior, the catering, intermission order, media transmission, public viewing, as well as my own way of tracing all this. And only after the show, in reading through reviews and interviews, I learned that Baumgarten and van Lieshout originally fostered the idea to perform the work in a single act, regardless of the stress this would cause for the singers. Van Lieshout blamed the caterers for spoiling this plan. Oh, what a chance being missed, I thought, to give this production a specific direction. The economic interests of the caterers, as well as the audience's need to get together in the case, would have made a difference. And if an entity does make a difference, it's part of the network. Networking theory in this sense, well, I omitted one sentence, which is beautiful. If the chair you are sitting on makes a difference to your situation and how you perceive it, then it is part of the network. Networking theory in this sense is a mid-range theory, less designed to tackle the big question of possible sense-making of Tannhäuser, but rather to look at seemingly small filaments which provide the necessary fundament for the big issues to rest on. Looking through this perspective of networking, I suddenly saw von Lieshout's factory design in a different light. And this is how this design actually looks like when you see it in installation rooms or you visit the artist community at the outskirts of Rotterdam. What if this mechanical or technical network would produce, in fact, nutrition for the audiences or refreshments for the singers while being looked as an aesthetic object on stage? So what if it actually produces something I can digest during the intermission afterwards? What if a possible defecation, which was indicated strongly anyway by the toilets staging left and right stage, and the poor audience seated next to them would really produce some kind of energy or warmth one could sense or perceive by the end of the show. And the reason I'm arguing that way is that this kind of factory design has the idea of recycling to it, and this artist community is considered with environmental questions. So it's not the look he's interested in, but also the function to self-support the artist community. Van Lieshout's ateliers in Rotterdam, a kind of artist community dedicated to environmental inventions as well as art objects, would certainly be capable to connect the objects to the Bayreuth Festspielhaus sewer system, frequently used during the intermission, or in terms of nutrition to a local brewery for that matter. This potential for networking, however, seemed to have been omitted or became impossible due to whatever reasons, but mainly for an obvious trust in form, and that form is something audiences primarily want to look at. As I have hopefully made clear, it does not need radical mise-en-scène or set design. The Bayreuth Festspielhaus, in their attempt to position themselves within the electronic networks, is already about to follow the paths towards formation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Wolf, very, very much for this very interesting, rich paper, which really is so much up to date, which I think is almost scary. Because I was thinking, where is this going, especially looking at the Munich example?
Yeah.
And has traditional opera a place there, a space there? That's the other question. And also, what will be a certain aesthetic conception as that one of Wagner will be playing a part within these new ways of, perceiving opera? These would be my questions, but we might want to discuss this later. But are there questions here or from Nicolas? I understand we had some technical problems, but I think you could hear us at least the whole time. Nicolas, is that true?
Actually, I missed about 20 minutes of the sound. The video was in and out the whole time, but I actually missed about 20 minutes of the...
Oh, sorry.
Including the Munich example that you just referred to, so I unfortunately don't know what you're talking about. I nevertheless have a question, but I don't know if it's already been answered. Should I ask my question?
Yes.
Yeah, please.
That would be great.
Okay, so my question is, you talked a lot about... Oh, first of all, I wanted to say I really liked your reading of the new Tannhäuser staging, because it now makes a lot more sense to me. But I wanted to ask you, you talked a lot about audience agency. What about audience experience? What is the difference of experience between being in the Festspielhaus? There's also the public viewing that you talked about. One can also now see it in the privacy of one's own home with video streaming. Do you want to talk at all about the differences of experience there, or is that not something that really belongs to your talk?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Yeah, it clarifies something. Aesthetic experience is something different, clearly, and it's out of the scope of networking and agency, because networking and agency actually is within a paradigm of action, and in this paradigm of action we would consider, or one would consider experience as experience being made, so as active. And there's a bridge, of course, to the long philosophical tradition of aesthetics in terms of experience, in terms of central input. If we think of emotions or affects, I would rather say, as entities being active in the way that they affect us. And this is actually a very old rhetorical tradition which comes back in networking theory, that we personalize affects. So affects are like a flu which happens to our body and affect us in a very active way, whereas the traditional art history theory would say, I'm a passive onlooker and I get something from the work of art, mostly from the work of art. It's not happening to me, but I decode it and I make a certain aesthetic experiences as a subject confronted with an object. And I think this split is drawn into question in actor network theory.
Okay.
Are there any questions here?
First, I'm very shocked by your example of Munich. So my question is, do you think that this public viewing event is just a trend? Because you can see it in, you know, this royal weddings and the soccer World Cup and now opera.
Yeah.
So my impression is that this public viewing thing is just spread over few aspects, but it just, to me, it seemed just like a trend, because I think most of the people who join this opera public viewing think they're not really interested, or not most of them, or some of them, they're not really interested in the actual event.
Yeah, this one way of reading, and certainly there's some truth in it. It's a hype, yeah. It's something I think the Bayreuth Festspielhaus cleverly jumped on to, and said, well, we want to have this format. They will stop it, as I heard. Yeah, I think it's the last time. This public viewing will take place, but that's for other reasons. No, it definitely is a trend, and I just learned that the Munich Opera House will have podcasts of their productions in YouTube. Yeah, something we couldn't thought of, and we can't think of in the case of Schlingensief's Parsifal, for example. So here's another policy, but certainly this is the trend towards distribution, because it's there and it's so easy to do that, and I can talk to Columbia. Yeah. What I've tried to show is that giving into mediation is something we cannot control, and so there's something else happening here. And I would also maintain that if you are somebody, or if somebody in the audience would go there in the intention to really, I want to see Wagner and I want to have a good aesthetic experience. Thank you. I was looking for that, but I can't afford the tickets. Then he'll get some, or he or she will get something out of it. It was really cleverly made, and it was really a strong experience. And I mean, the reason that people stayed there during this thunderstorm for 40 minutes, getting totally wet, proved precisely that. But there's more to this event, and in return, we can read the traditional opera event differently. Maybe people attend the opera for reasons different from that in aesthetic form. But you never know. Yeah, once they are in the opera house, we all assume, this is why I love this image here, we all assume they are convinced to watch an opera. Maybe they think about something else. In a historical perspective, they did so. Audiences never behaved so brave and so passive as we tend to think it's normal.
Could I just add something to this particular conversation? There's also something about social performance.
Yeah.
Whether one goes to a gala festival performance or a public viewing, there's a certain kind of, I mean, and that's, I guess, is part of your agency argument.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah.
Silvia Meyer has a question.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for this talk. This is very, very interesting, but I have many questions. Just to ask one, does this type of network theory have an interest in the specificity of the performance on stage in the Festspielhaus? And if so, what would be the specificity? This may link to what Anno just said. Where's the place of the opera as such? That would be interesting for me, especially since I was thinking of developments in literary theory, where we ended up in asking, what's the piece of art?
Yeah.
Where's it left? So
yeah.
I wonder whether there's a structural analogy which you could comment on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for this question. Yes, I can. Where's the opera performance? Where's the big A question? You know, what about this? I think the charming idea is that we have to pose this question again and in new ways. I cannot answer it, and I'm not in control to predict, and I'm thankfully not in charge to come up with something. But what I see here is a long tradition in drama and how you call it, Sprechtheater.
Plays.
Sorry. Legitimate theater?
Plays.
Plays, yeah, well, it's staging plays. And also in post-dramatic theater, I see trends, how this question is answered in always in a singular way. Yeah? And I thought I have made some tendencies clear that it's either the opera singers on stage or the audience. Why not do something similar in an opera performance? And Baumgarten actually tried to do that, but nobody noticed. Yeah, he set some like 12 members of the audiences on stage, but this performance didn't make use of it and didn't address it as something specifically. And they just felt uncomfortable, and I'm quoting an eyewitness here. So yes, as art is an historical concept, it will change. It will certainly change. But the second question is on a second answer would be on a methodological level. What I apply here is never designed for questions on aesthetics and art in particular. Actor network theory comes from science, history, and it has other interests. And this is why Monster and Loathing was the bridge for me to look at this way of thinking and to transfer it to the subject or the issues I'm interested in. But it's not. It's an ongoing discussion whether one can do so. And of course, it's these little filaments I'm looking at, these side views. They only make sense if the rare perspective is so dominant as it is the case in the Bayreuth Festspielhaus. Yeah, it's the temple of art, so to say, left. You enter there, and immediately, in my case, being informed and educated in a different way, I tend to look aside because it's too direct. It's what they want from me. It's too obvious.
Thank you for the question. Also, I was struck by the video clip on the Munich event, which created its own aesthetics,
yeah,
and I was wondering,
so.
What was it like to be dancing on that square? That didn't feel very comfortable. I mean, it didn't look very, appealing. But with that music and having these other little pictures put in there, it looked very nice and very cute. You know. So that's maybe the aesthetics we're talking about, not so much about the actual performance. I don't know. Susanne, lache nicht.
There seems to be a second layer in between the Festspielhaus atmosphere and public viewing, which is life in HD. So the phenomenon which hasn't been applied to the Bayreuth Festival yet, to have not society, but a different community, being drawn into cinemas all over the world, looking at live performances in San Francisco Opera, in the Metropolitan Opera, and paying a lot of money for it. Money that sometimes is, or like prices are sometimes much higher than the cheapest places you could get in the opera house itself. So how does that fit into the network picture? And I mean, one guess, is this going to be applied to the Wagner Festival at some stage?
Yeah, I would recommend that. I mean, if they lose the sponsor, Siemens, that's the way to save this format. Obviously, there is an interest, obviously. The atmosphere will change, that's for sure. Obviously, there's an interest, And it tells a great deal about what I displayed here in my paper. And there's even more going on I could not comment on, but just one thing which came to my, which I learned only last week, is that in Hamburg, the Thalia Theater has a public voting on their seasonal program. Like it, don't like it. And what they did is, I think they put something on by Dürrenmatt on the first place, and now they have to stage a Dürrenmatt play. But of course, the director said, and the management said, there might be some technical and financial issues to be solved. But it tells again a great deal about how we open up the format and how we reinvent what is a public space, what is public sphere, when whatever this sphere is created, is so it's not virtual, but it's affected by virtual spaces. Now as I said, it's an array of perspectives we have to address.
Thomas.
Yeah. Thanks, Wolf-Dieter. That was a great talk. I have also a lot of questions on my paper, but I reduce it to one. Just one remark. I think the audience performance is part of opera history from the very beginning. Maybe we can say up to the point when the light was turned off in the audience hall, and this was in Bayreuth actually. Yeah. and this was the change in the whole representation of the audience from that point on. And I find it quite interesting which efforts the Bayreuth Festival actually made to reinstall that representation, which was actually not part of the festival and of the festival idea. If you look at the opera house itself, indoor, there is no space for representation. So you fall more to speak into the audience hall. So indoor, there is no point in comparison to Munich. There is no space for representation. So they're quite interesting how many efforts now are made to. Okay, we have this first day red carpet. Yeah, we
have this. No,
we have this, but you have this in Salzburg and where else? Yeah. But so it's quite interesting from my point of view how much efforts were made. But this was only the remark. My question is on the character of life. What is actually life? If you see the arte, you see the label life, but it's actually a fake. It's not fake.
Life is always a fake.
No, it's not life. But if you have a public viewing for the football and it is not live, nobody will come. So, but was the public viewing actually live? Does it start at 4 o'clock or does it start later, or what is the character of life, or do you see any inflation of this live event?
Thank you for it helps me also to bring in some more theory here at this point. I mean, live as a category as Philipp Ausländer has proposed it in our discipline only makes sense if you have recorded. It's on the semiotic level, it's an act of signification, or it's a signature, or datiert. And as Brecht said, there's nothing older than the newspaper of yesterday. So we wouldn't look at the recorded soccer game in the same way. And there's obviously something in our imagination which is important to make this object interesting and worth looking at, which has to do with time experience. This is happening now, whatever this means. And my argument would be in the line of Ausländer. If live and recorded is related, there's a certain dialectic, and people are keen to transform their desire to have something live on a screen. But they tend to forget, of course, and if you would ask people, they would say, yeah, it was a brilliant transmission, but then the bodily experience of the singers was so telling. Because it was like this signature that, okay, you didn't get it all, but it was for free anyway, but now you get a little one of this, whatever we call live or authentic. Yeah? And here, I see many possibilities here to intervene also from the management and to make sense out of this interplay rather than the one I have experienced, which is precisely, this is a mishappening. Yeah? This is probably, it was a spontaneous decision. Let's go down there. These poor people are probably totally wet. And wouldn't it be nice to just see them? Yeah.
But just a personal question. When you flee from the public viewing by the thunderstorm, have you continued the transmission, the recording at home?
No.
Okay.
No.
because I tried to see it in the television, and the transmission break down. It's a funny story. Yeah. So I switched on the television, seeing the live recording, and what I see was was Beethoven's Fidelio, because the broadcast broke down. So this is a sort of liveness today.
I have to admit, I was there in a double role, as an investigator and as a family father. So I decided we should leave, and I know a very good pizzeria with a roof. And as the kids wanted to sleep afterwards, I decided I have a look at the footage, which is there because everything is covered. Media does tell more than we can possibly intend it should. Yeah, that's the problem.
Are there other questions here, or Nicholas? I mean, I would have one question actually. What is the role of the performer within all of this? I was thinking about that question when they all came on the stage after the public viewing at the Volksplatz.
Yeah.
How does that change their attitudes towards the performance? I mean, that's, of course, we can't really answer that question, but I think that also should be taken into consideration. I mean, how they are also probably elevated by the fact that they are, you know, that they can be seen and heard by the whole world, basically. I mean, this must be making a difference.
It surely makes a difference. I think so. I would say there's at least 3 different appearances. There's this seemingly private, casual appearance afterwards, and that, in a way, was very charming. If you look at the faces and you look at this adrenaline going on there, but as you see in this picture, I mean, it's like a puppet how they appear. It's just too big, and there's lots of close-ups. I've seen the first acts. Yeah, so this is not a stage appearance, but a screen appearance, and every film actor knows what this means, and I know what this means since this is being podcasted. And the third role would be that of a live performer, and a live performer can always react on the energy, can always make justice to what he's doing on stage in reaction to how it is perceived. Not so much in Bayreuth, maybe there are other concepts to strengthen this notion of feedback, of course, if you leave the house lights on, but still there is this possibility that you get a feedback, that you're disturbed or people leave. And poor actors who are trained as a live performer and who are confronted with televised marionette appearance, and B, this, what is it actually? It's something you ask for when you think in PR terms, yeah, public relation terms.
Green stars on site.
And then also I think the difference between television and on the big screen also should be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about this with Gundula Kreuzer's paper as well. I mean, how does that production change, like, dramatically? And I think in this case, for the worse. I think the actual Neuenfeld's aesthetic, which is also very much there, how could it not be, is completely different. I mean, especially with the close-ups and so on, and also like taking the the pictures from above.
I mean, they did a great job, but they did,
No, they did
exactly the job to make a TV transmission out of it. And this is, in 90%, this is the case. But when you look at, for example, a dance filming experiments with Anna-Theresa de Kersmacher, so much is possible beforehand, so much authorship by the performers for what happens with their performers is possible. Yeah, and people are interested in what happens out of their enactment afterwards. I think they are not asked. I think this is the uncomfortable part I see here. Yeah, that it just happens, and also the audience is not asked or specifically addressed, other than this is a nice family event. Just bring your chairs and feel comfortable. There's more to do out of it. And if you actually look at the afternoon and the morning program, the Kinderoper, this is much more focused on a specific group and less. It's not a cultural offer which can rest on the notion that this is high culture and this is Lohengrin anyway, and Neuenfels is a big name, and the rest will tell. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're coming to an end here. Maybe I might want to answer my own question right after your talk a little bit, also referring to what you were just saying right now. I mean, I think the answer probably would be, I think we need like ideas and creative like insights about combinations really in a very sophisticated way. And I was thinking about Katie Mitchell, somebody who really involves media in a very clever way. And how could that be transferred also in the task to go out there with the same production and really design the productions more towards the needs we have, and the needs seem to be changing a lot. I mean, this really is very clear after your talk.
Can I just
sure.
have one tiny comment at the end here?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to say, I think the originator of the feedback loop is Wagner himself. I was just remembering the words he said as the curtain fell on the first complete cycle of The Ring in 1876. He went in front of the audience and he said, Sie haben jetzt gesehen, was wir können. Wollen Sie jetzt? Und wenn Sie wollen, werden wir eine Kunst haben. That's all.
That's brilliant.
That's actually really brilliant. Thank you very much for this last insight on this topic, also for this year's. This was our 10th lecture this year, and I think it's really fantastic, amazing. But there is a new year, and there are new lectures next year. So the next one is on January 11, and this is our last keynote. Emil Wennekes will be talking about remedying Wagner, productive reception in visual and virtual media. And this leaves me with wishing you all here and also on the net and in Colombia a great holiday and a good start in the new year 2012. And thank you, Wolf, again so much for the paper, and see you all next year. Thank you. Bye.